All right, let's open up to Deuteronomy 8. This is going to be the first place. I'm going to spend just a few minutes here. I think Deuteronomy 8 is not only a good review of our last class, but a good review of almost everything up to this point. I've been holding off. I think I actually need one more class before Deuteronomy 8 would summarize everything, but I'm not going to be here. I appreciate Kevin's going to be teaching on Sunday, and Larry's going to be teaching in 1 week next Wednesday, so thank you for that. Deuteronomy 8, we're going to read the whole chapter. No, that's not true. Yeah. We'll read the whole chapter, Deuteronomy chapter 8. Remember, we've been talking about different outcomes, objectives of suffering. There's suffering that happens as a direct consequence of sin, and there's suffering that happens as direct punishment from God. And then we talked about, okay, so if those things happen, what is the objective? Why? It's the why. The first is the what, suffering that's punishment from God, suffering that's a cause and effect. That's the what, but then the why. And then the why is, we talked about discipline. A father who loves his child disciplines his child. And then we talked about development. It's the concept of the refining fire. Oh, you know what? We didn't do the refining fire. That's your notes, right? Yeah. So, but it's we're growing into something, developing. And so, Deuteronomy chapter 8. Let's just read this chapter. I've got a list. Maybe you'll see more than 5 things, but I see 5 things in this chapter. This is probably the best one-stop shop for this class. This text. I think it's great. It would serve as a really good outline, I think. Okay, verse 1. Deuteronomy 8, verse 1. The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you. Number 1. Why does suffering happen? Well, one of the reasons listed is to humble his people. And this is a little bit of a bummer, but you got to skip the next part and look down at verse 3. Verse 3 talks about the humbling. It says, he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. So there's humbling. We'll come back to that verse in just a second. The humbling is the same thing that we talked about with Paul in 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. God, would you please take away this thorn in the flesh? And you have to remember this part. He starts by saying, I experienced the third heaven. Okay, it would be really easy to become conceited and arrogant if you found yourself like, I've seen things that you all have not seen. I've heard the voice of God. Paul says, I've seen Jesus with my own eyes. Do you expect that the temptation would be there to maybe think a little bit extra of yourself? And he says, God sent me a thorn in the flesh, and I said, would you take it away? And God said, no, I'm not. And so, suffering happens, number 1, to humble us. Anything you want to say about humbling? I don't know if this is a universal thing or just like a some of us thing. I've found myself in this boat multiple times where I get to thinking an awful lot of myself in for any number of reasons, and I think sometimes I can spot it. But even when I can't spot it, I can almost always see it after the fact, because when you're humbled, you know it. And it's like a great blessing. It is a great blessing to be humbled when you have a chance, rather than to carry on in that nonsense.
Maybe just a quantity thing, that the humbling for the Exodus generation was not just one or two instances, but was throughout the 40 years. There's 40 years worth of humbling. Yeah. And I'm assuming if we were to know the rest of the story of Paul's life, that didn't go away either. Like, he took that humbling to death.
Yeah. And I'm not done with this conversation, because that 40 years of humbling served an important thing later on. And so humbling is like part one of this thing.
I heard a preacher once make a pretty, I don't necessarily agree with this, but he made it, his case or his thesis was that the thorn in Paul's flesh, which he speaks about, was very much his predisposition to be arrogant. And what he was asking God is, help me with this, take this away from me. And God said, no, you need to contend with that, or this is something you need to continue to contend with just to keep you humble. Now, I don't agree with that. I personally think it was Paul's eyesight that he was praying about. I think there's other clues in the text that might indicate that. But, I mean, it does, sometimes you do read some of the things that Paul wrote, and they seem on the edge of arrogance. So what comes to mind immediately is 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter, when he says, well, I wish all men were just like I were. Nevertheless, and every now and then somebody says something like that seemed like he's leaning towards arrogance. But I guess, I don't know what segment of the population this preacher, this gospel preacher, represents, or if there's a big following of that theory. But I remember hearing it, I remember thinking, nah, it's disgusting.
Yeah, no. I sympathize with that. It is a curse to be made in such an awesome way. I fight it every single day. It's a battle.
That's exactly what I'm
Yeah, okay, let's keep going here. Verse 2, it says, these 40 years in the wilderness, number 1, that he might humble you. Number 2, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So there's number 2. That point, God sent struggles, trials. I mean, none of us likes evil and suffering. I mean, listen, we're talking about horrible things that happen to people. Take the real life thing, and God says to his people, I sent you that to test you, to see if you're going to obey me or not. Now, I'm not going to open it up for that class, because that concept of God testing to find something out is Kevin's entire class on Sunday morning. And so bring all of your hard questions for him on that one. So, okay, let's keep going. Verses 3 and 4. He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. I'm going to do like a humbling part 2 for verse 3 and 4. God allowed his people to suffer for the specific purpose of teaching them to rely on him. To force them to say, I mean, when you have no other options and you just have to turn to God, he says, that's what I need you to know, to rely on me. And there's more coming on that one too. Verse 5 is number 4. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. We did a whole class on that one, discipline. I like that even the word is used there. And then this last one is verse 7 through 20. I probably won't read the whole thing, but it's a really good point. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, fountains and springs flowing out in the valleys and the hills, a land of wheat and barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranates, land of olive trees and honey, A land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing. A land whose stones are iron, out of whose hills you can dig copper. Let me stop here and ask you this real quick. If you live as God says his people are going to live, if you live in an overflowing of abundance, what's the risk? Like, what's the thing that might happen in that situation? What?
Self-reliance.
Look at what I did. Look at what I can do for myself. Like all of this stuff. Look at all this stuff. Like I don't have to worry about food. In the wilderness, we didn't have enough. I got all kinds of food. And for 5 minutes entering into the land, you say, oh, I'm so glad to have this food. After 5 years of having all this food, you get pretty much like, hey, I've got all of this food. That's exactly what God is going to talk about down here. He says in verse 11, take care lest you forget that the Lord your God by not keeping, forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commands, his rules, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up and you forget the Lord your God. I don't need God anymore because I have everything. That really fits in with some of the earlier stuff about how I let you suffer to humble you and to teach you this so that in good times you don't forget who God is and what God does for us. And so I think that one, we talked about this a lot on Monday morning at the Mackeys. What an awesome thing about suffering to think, here is this suffering that's awful and horrible, and I sure don't want to do it, and I don't want anybody to have to do it. But to think that it might be paving a very important road for me in the future that I don't even know exists yet. We could look at suffering like that. So there's 5 things for you. He humbles us. He tests us. He teaches us to rely upon him. He disciplines us. And he prepares us for the future with suffering. All of those, I think, work within this class that we did last week where we talked about suffering as development. We're growing and developing through suffering. Is there anything you want to say about that passage, any of those?
Just a question, this isn't too silly, but is it that we're being prepared for future events in our life? Or is it like, is the parallel that we're being prepared for heaven, that we have to go through earth? This is our wondering in order to be ready to go to heaven.
You know, I don't know if this is the right answer to your question, but I'll tell you what I think about with that question. Especially since, where does it sound familiar to you? To humble you so that you can learn that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Where's that from?
Matthew 4 and verse 4.
It's from Jesus while he's being tempted and suffering in the wilderness. Satan comes to Jesus and he says, turn these stones into bread. And Jesus' response is, no, I am going to choose to suffer, to learn to rely on God and to choose to suffer. And to answer your question, why might Jesus have thought it was so important to learn that lesson in the wilderness right then? Because he was going to really need to know what it meant to rely on God when he's hanging on that cross. You know what I'm saying? So it's not just about heaven. It's I'm learning things that I need in this life that's going to ultimately help me be right with God. Does that come close to your?
I mean, what you just said is what Hebrews 5 and verse 8 says, right? Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered.
Yeah.
Which is a little hard for me, thinking about Jesus being God, to think about there was something he needed to learn. But that's what it says. Whether I get my arms around it or not, that's what it says.
Yeah.
He had something to learn.
Yeah. Hebrews 5. That's where he just pulled it from. Okay. Any other comments on this passage? Because I just treat that Deuteronomy 8 as a part of our last class. We're just finishing our last class before we move into today.
It just made me think of Job 33 where it says, well, 33:29, behold, God does all these oftentimes with men to bring back his soul from the pit, and he can be enlightened with the light of life. I think he said, I didn't read on, but I think he says like once, twice, 3 times in a man's life he may do a really hard suffering like that. I don't know if that's like precise amount or, but.
Yeah, we have to learn some stuff. We have to learn. Okay, so objectives. A father disciplines the child that he loves. Suffering develops us and helps us to grow. I intentionally did that because I don't want to spend an entire 45 minutes on this point, which is for the class tonight. So I'm glad that we had Deuteronomy 8 to do that with. But I want to talk about soul making tonight. That's our class, and I want to tell you why. So if you're going to be reading through a Problem of Evil book, soul making is going to be one of the first chapters. Soul making is going to be in the same section as when you talk about Augustine's privation of good, Molinism and compatibilism, like all of those things that we talked about in January. That's where this is going to go. But I wanted to push this one off until after suffering as development. Because we've seen what the Bible has to say about suffering as development. I think that's an important foundation to move into this conversation, which is why we're doing it now. I want to say something. I was talking to Mark about this today. I can imagine a situation where you would leave class tonight and you would say, I could have done without that. Like, why did we need to talk about this? Probably if I were you, that's the way that I would feel at the end of class tonight. Like, I could do without that. Except for this one thing. You are going to hear pieces of this. You're going to see it on social media, and you're going to hear it on podcast. And what I would like to happen is, when you hear it, you can identify it and say, this is what's good and true and biblical and right, and this is what's wrong. And I'll just give you an example. Does anybody see the, there's a podcast called The Sean Ryan Show, and Sean Ryan interviewed Wesley Huff. Anybody see that? Yeah, like Wesley Huff is this, first of all, he's Canadian, so he's super annoying to listen to. But aside from that, it's kind of cool to see people go on these giant platforms and talk about Jesus and the Bible. But one of the things that, this is what I was talking to Mark about with this thing. I don't recommend this. I don't follow these things except for Sean Ryan's a Navy SEAL, so he talks like a Navy SEAL. So you need to know about that. But Wesley Huff is this. I wanted to hear what he had to say about the Bible. So they do their little gift exchange and all of this, and Sean Ryan starts out and he goes, hey, I got to start with this. This is a question. And he just comes right out of the gate with the problem of evil. And I sent it to Mark, and I'm like, see what I'm talking about? Like, this is what people talk about. This is what people in the world are thinking about. Why do these bad things happen? And how do I understand my life as a Christian and all of this stuff when this bad stuff is happening? And there are pieces of that stuff that you're going to see on social media and hear in interviews like that refer back to this thing, and I want you to know what this thing is. That's why we're talking about it tonight. So here you go. Here's a piece of it. It starts with Irenaeus. One of our very first classes we talked about Augustine and what is evil. And Augustine said evil is a privation of good. Remember that? It's the absence of good. And so one of the things that Augustine does is he looks backwards to the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, and he explains evil as something that happened back then that's wrong and bad, and we're having to suffer the consequences of even still today, which I think is right. I think that evil is not a part of God's creation. In Genesis 1, it was good, 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 it was very good. God did not create evil in his world. And so he looks back and he says, this is what evil and suffering are. It's something that went wrong. Irenaeus looks forward. And what he does is he says, no, suffering and evil are a necessary part of God's creation. He would go so far as to say that God created it and that this is an important part of God's creation because God uses evil and suffering and bad things in the world to help us grow and develop into what we're supposed to be. Which kind of sounds like what we've been talking about, right? With the suffering is development. Here are some words that he uses. Humans are children and infants, and we are innocent when we're created, when we're babies, but we are not spiritually and morally mature. Just because we're innocent doesn't mean we're mature in the thing that God created us to be and the thing that God wants us to be. Here's a quote. I'm not sure if this will register or not. It was possible for God himself to have made man perfect from the first, but man could not receive this perfection, being as yet an infant. And so there has to be evil and suffering so that we can grow into what God wants us to be. In this model, suffering provides for us the necessary conditions to freely find God and grow into his likeness. So that's where this starts. Starts pretty early. I got some dates for you for Irenaeus. 130 to 202. Like we're still early in church history. 130. This is not a huge deal until a man comes along. I think he writes in this. Oh, I got it wrote down. For his first edition is 1966. Most up-to-date revision is 2007. John Hick. And he refers to this thing called soul making, which is what we're going to talk about here. Soul making is that the world is a classroom. And the purpose is that it is designed to make it so that we can grow up into the thing that God wants us to be. In Genesis 1:26, where God says, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness," both Irenaeus and John Hick are going to say, those are two different things. The image and the likeness of God. The image of God is the thing that we would all say, like we have a soul, there is an eternal part of us, we have reason, the things that make us different from animals, basically. That's the image of God. But that we are made in the likeness of God, but none of us have yet achieved the likeness of God. They treat them as separate, and they say, no, we need to grow and develop through this life into the likeness of God. I've got some things here for you. He argues that, there's a quote, if God's goal were merely to maximize human comfort, the world would be a hedonistic paradise for human pets. Instead, he made a classroom environment tailored for growth. Okay, let me just stop here real quick. Are there any questions about like the basic idea of soul making? You see what the word soul making comes from a poem. He stole it from, doesn't stole it. He took the words from somebody else to describe it as soul making. It's like, okay, I need to understand evil, the nature of evil and the nature of God. And what he does, what John Hick and Irenaeus both do, is they say, God created evil, and the purpose is to help us become the thing that he ultimately wants us to be. Anything you want to say about that?
Sounds like maybe Augustine's view is that man evil as this means, where this view is God created evil for a purpose of man coming to him, it says. For the purpose of drawing man near to him.
Yes, that's right. I think though yes, I'm just going to repeat though, I mean you open the door with Augustine, I'm going to repeat. Augustine looks back and he says, no, God created everything good and perfect, and man for the purpose of enjoying fellowship with man, just the way he wanted them to be, and sin and evil and suffering happened as a result of the fall, and that's not what's supposed to happen. Soul making is kind of the opposite of that. No, it is what's supposed to happen, and you can't be what God wants you to be without going through the trials of life and becoming that. That's kind of a high-level overview here.
So evil is necessary. And is this similar to like the Wesleyan view of like sanctification and growing into holiness?
I don't know. I don't know with that connection. Sorry. I just have to end with I don't know. Morgan?
This is just a theory, right?
What?
You're presenting this just as another.
So here's what I wrote in my notes for myself to remember. I want to present it as objectively as I can. I'm going to end, the very last piece of my notes are critiques, like what I think is wrong about this. I think very obviously I'm not very good at, like if I don't have any kind of poker face. I think it's messed up to say that God created evil and that this is a part of his plan. And I think you could go through the whole Bible and but there is still, I think there is still something to this in that, okay, this is not necessarily what God created and what God intended, but that's the reason why we did this class after the last class, because we are developing and growing through suffering. Like there's nuggets of this that are right and true. And it's so nuanced that I want you to at least know what it is. So when you hear somebody, even if they just say soul making, or when you hear somebody describing, oh no, you'll see, I see memes all the time. You do too. You just don't know that you're looking at them yet. I see memes all the time that say things like, it's impossible to experience and to know the full measure of love and happiness unless you know its opposite first. That's this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like you can't know what love is unless you know what hurt is. And you can't know what happiness is unless you know what suffering is. That's coming from this. And what I want you to do is when you see that, I want you to say, I know what's happening there. Yeah.
Is this kind of like that old saying of hard times make good men make easy times make bad men? Like God created everything good, and that made like man with our free will went and screwed everything up. Now that everything is screwed up, God gave us a way out if we choose it, kind of thing. Is that kind of what you're talking about? I would treat that sentence like a buffet, and I'd take some of it and leave some of it. Good times don't create weak men. Like if Adam and Eve had done what they were supposed to do in the garden, it would have been perfect and ideal, just the way it was supposed to be. That's not a flaw. That's a benefit. But yes, suffering does develop us into something, hopefully. Mark?
Genesis 1, where God has already created the water, but then he creates the fish to live in the water. He's created the earth, but then he creates the vegetation to grow on the earth. When you take that fish out of the water, it dies.
That sounds a lot like Wesley Huff.
You said that on the podcast.
So let me give you some things about this soul making that are like, I like it, but I also want to be real careful with it, is what I want to do. Number one, real challenge and temptations are required. Morality cannot simply be given. It must be slowly built up through personal histories of moral effort. Things like courage and self-control can only develop in a world where danger and failure and suffering exist. When I see the little thing on Facebook that says you can't know happiness without knowing suffering, I think I would be perfectly fine to just be happy without suffering. Like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But there is another piece of that. Like, suffering does create an opportunity to become something better. I like this especially. I really like the idea of courage. If there is no car that drives off a bridge with a family and it's sinking in the water, if there's no suffering like that happens in the first place, then there is no opportunity for courage for somebody to jump in and risk and give their own life to do this ultimately good thing, right? And so the bad is necessary for the good in soul making. We can skip that one. I'll tell you what this is. The God's distance on this. John Hicks spends a lot of time talking about. God maintains an epistemic distance by not making his presence overwhelmingly obvious. Why? Why doesn't God just say, "Here I am, world"? And he says, here's the reason why. Because it allows humans to freely choose to turn to God rather than being coerced by a direct awareness of his power. And so, I don't know if you've ever wondered that or not, but it's like, hey, God could just shout down from heaven and say, "I'm real," and solve all the problems. At least all the problems of doubt. And in this, it's no. There needs to be room for doubt in order for there to be the faith and the belief that he's looking for. And then a reliable natural order. He talks a lot about things like hurricanes and tornadoes. Why do hurricanes happen and kill so many people? And why do tsunamis happen and kill 400,000 people in Indonesia? And it's like, because this is nature, and nature has to operate according to certain natural laws, and it has to be predictable. And when it's predictable, then we can see those patterns and learn from it and grow and be better because we've learned from something. I'm going to stop here real quick.
I'm just going to ask, so two of the examples people talk about biblically a lot are Old Testament, hardening of Pharaoh's heart, New Testament, obviously the suffering of Jesus and his crucifixion. So in this viewpoint, would it be that God stepped in and altered the order so that literally he made Pharaoh not do the right thing, and he stepped in and made people make Jesus suffer? Is that what this viewpoint is saying?
I don't know about where this viewpoint would be there, but I never miss an opportunity to say this. Do you have the ESV Study Bible by any chance? Okay, well, if anybody does, in Exodus 4, there's a really cool chart that talks about God hardened Pharaoh's heart, shows all the places. But then there's a whole other column where it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And it's like, there's not a one-time thing. Like, he participated in this. Anyway, I don't know. Okay, let me do some critique stuff. We're going to run out of time, and I don't want to leave this with you without telling you why I think it's not worth hanging on to. I think there's pieces of this, like we talked about, the development. It's true. But when you see these memes and hear people talk about this, here's what you need to think and remember. Number one, God made everything good. Evil is not a thing that God made. for the purpose of making humanity morally perfect. God may use evil to accomplish his will, but it is not a part of his original plan. I think there's another piece of this that's at least something that I need to tell you. Like, if we're going to talk about this, I need to tell you about this too. John Hick, at the end, just goes completely bonkers with this. He enters into universalism where everybody ends up in heaven. Even after you die, it's almost like a purgatory where it's like, no, even in hell, God is still developing people into his likeness, and the completion of all things will not happen until all people are in the likeness of God. And so hell for John Hick is still a part of the development process, which is not biblical. Hell is, in this parable of story of Lazarus and the rich man, there is a chasm and it cannot be crossed. If you go to hell, that's it. And there's some other pieces about this, but that's probably enough for tonight. Part of this is just me being selfish because I want to fill out my notes, but part of it is I at least want you to know it's a thing. Anything you want to say about this?
We've said it a few times, but the question is, why does God allow evil to happen? How come he doesn't step in and do something? Well, he did in Genesis 5 when the flood came. He stepped in and stopped it then. The Tower of Babel, he stepped in and put a stop to that. I mean, there are examples where he has stepped in and done things. We have an example where he stepped in and put Christ in for us. You know, he is doing things, but maybe just not the way sometimes we would imagine maybe it could be.
Yeah. I think we should call that, this class we call that the problem of evil and suffering. I think it would be worthwhile to have an entire class called the problem of good. Why does any of us experience anything good at all? That would be an interesting question to try and answer. Okay, so if you want to prepare for Kevin's class on Sunday, I'm not updated here. You might need to get into that PowerPoint. If you want to prepare for Kevin's class, he's going to be talking about testing, and I'll give you a really good starting place on this. It's Genesis 22. I don't know if Kevin's going to talk about this example or not, but this is a really good starting place for this conversation. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering. And he's willing to do it. And the end result is verse 12, where God says, now I know that you fear God. And so go ahead and be thinking about God testing us to see the outcome. And that's what class is going to be on Sunday. Any last words? All right. Thanks for at least letting me talk about my stuff tonight.